Robert, you have more?
I believe we've got one outstanding question from Diana with regards to the alternatives and looking at a bridge crossing for this general area up in here. Now, as part of like when we took a look at the design options.
Could I interrupt for a minute? This issue with Ed Lieberman, how was that going to be resolved then?
Well, the only item that we have is that paragraph 1B, and I'm fully confident that what we've shown on the maps is the correct and proper way to do it. We will have to obviously meet with him, go over things for a third time with him, and then hopefully he'll be able to provide a favorable letter back to this commission.
Okay, so we would get a letter back from him, one way or the other.
Certainly, the letter's beyond my control, but that's certainly what we would hope to accomplish.
Scott, are you with us on that? That correspondence from Ed may be at least an indication that satisfying the question that Jim just had?
That is something I anticipate coming, but given that it's something that is coming from staff within town,
You can't force him to write it.
well, I wasn't going to say that. What I was going to say is that if anyone was inclined to hold up their thoughts on this project as a result of that, it's not necessary to do so, is all I'm advising at this point. So, again, I mean, as far as the topo maps that we have on file in the town hall depicting the elevations were done in 95 by FEMA, and they're extremely accurate to within a half a foot. So, I mean, again, I feel, at least for these lots on lots 4 and 5, that because again of the topos and the slopes, that flooding is not going to be an issue towards any of these properties. So take that for what it's worth. But certainly, yes, at some point there should be a letter coming down from that office.
Mr. Wiewick.
Okay, I think, again, looking at the list of alternates that we considered in here, Mr. Codispoti hinted on one where you obviously have a no-build option if we weren't to do this crossing. And again, it's our opinion that to do that is not a good use of the remaining 7.4 acres of upland area located in this general location here. Now, short of that, when we went through and did our hydraulic analysis and calculations for the area coming through here, one of the alternates that we could put forth is that we stick with the pipe size that's needed to convey the stormwater through that area. So we could certainly be looking at a 36-inch pipe for a 100-year storm, and I would venture to say for a 25-year storm we're probably looking at an 18 to 21-inch pipe, and you basically to utilize that crossing. In terms of looking into a bridge structure for the crossing and trying to do a clear span of that area, again, for the application that's at hand, we're looking at 0.07 acres of wetland filling. At the widest point, I believe we're approximately 40 feet is what would be needed to clear span the wetland area. And if you were looking at not doing any disturbance to the wetlands for construction, to install the bridge, the abutments, the footings, and everything else that would need to be installed as part of the superstructure, you're certainly looking at clear spanning much more than 40 feet in order to avoid zero filling and zero disturbance of that area. As part of that, you take a look at does it make sense from a feasibility perspective, does it make sense from a prudence point of view. It's our opinion, given what the nature of this wetland area here is and the primary function is, the costs that would be encountered to build a bridge in this area and the maintenance factors that would ultimately be borne by the town of Orange to maintain such a structure going down the road did not appear to make a whole lot of sense for the benefits to be derived by trying to clear span that. In addition to that, if you were to take a look at the stormwater system, basically we have the catch basin, the last set of catch basins are up in front of lots 5 and 8 up in this general area here. They do convey water down across this crossing. If we were to get into a clear spanning or into a clear span provision, we would lose that ability to convey this stormwater runoff from this area here to the detention basin. So it would make providing for that zero increase in stormwater runoff from a peak discharge perspective virtually impossible, because in essence this crossing gives us the ability to convey water from this ridge line in this upland area from point A to point B. So that was one of the other reasons why we really didn't consider the clear spanning of that wetlands system to be feasible from that perspective, because then that would negate the stormwater conveyance like within that area there. So those were basically the 3 or 4 options that we looked at, and this is what we arrived at, and we felt that this was the best compromise between environmental concerns as well as drainage concerns in coming up with the 5-foot by 8-foot box culvert.
Robert, if I recall correctly, that's about 3,000 square feet to be filled. What is the greater area of disturbance for all the work that will be needed while the fill's going in, the construction of the road, putting in the catch basins, just in that if you will, that red-lined area?
What is inside that red line, that represents the .07 acres.
Yeah, well, that's about 3,000 square feet that will be, as you call it, filled. But what about the work that's necessary?
That includes the
That
area of
includes
work.
the work.
Right. Because if you'll notice, our last contour line is right here, and the edge of the culvert is here. We're showing that fill line, if you would, to extend out past the end of the culvert a good 10, maybe 15 feet. I'd have to put a scale on it, but I mean, I think we've been pretty liberal in calculating the area, that we're not trying to hard line it right up to the edge of the culvert.
Yeah.
So
My thought was, and maybe I misunderstood, is will you have a backhoe or front-end loader or something out there outside of that 3,000 square foot area working and crushing part of the wetlands?
I don't see any real reason for doing that, because again, I think with the crossing that's in here and the old farm crossing, we've got the opportunity to basically work from both sides, as the case may be. On a temporary basis, if the machinery did need to get up in the air, they're going to utilize the existing farm crossing until that's done. And again, with the type of structure that we've got proposed in here, you're not going to go through the level of disturbance that you would if you were trying to put in a bridge structure here. It's a relatively small box culvert, 5 by 8. It's not an excessive weight. It's something that a normal or a backhoe should be capable of placing in sight. There's no special foundations required for this. There's no special footings at all. Basically, it'll be to get into this area, excavate and stockpile the wetland substrate material for reuse, like within the culvert, like once that's placed.
What's the third dimension of the 5 by 8 culvert? Does it have a length?
I believe it's approximately 96 feet long.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, the box culvert within it will have some kind of structure to carry the stormwater runoff through it?
Well, the box culvert is basically, if you can envision, it's 5 feet high. So if you can envision the board, this is roughly 3 feet high.
Yeah.
So the height would be up to about here.
Try to talk to the mic, please.
Okay. Yeah, so the height would be up to about here, and this board is 3 feet wide, so it'd be double the board in through here. Now again, the bottom of the culvert, and what we're anticipating, the bottom 18 inches of the culvert is going to be filled back in with that wetland substrate material. So it'll help maintain the integrity and the regime as what's upstream and downstream to help with the environmental and the migration going through that area.
So the catch basin piping from CB8, I guess it is?
Oh, okay.
How does that pipe
You're referring to this catch
Right.
basin running here. That catch basin piping will actually be on top of the box culvert. It won't go through it or under it. That's been designed so it's actually up above it.
you look at the topos, you'll see there's about 4 foot of cover over the top of the
Okay.
culvert. Is if you,
To the road, yeah.
the existing grades on the east side of the culvert, existing grades are at 158, but you notice right on top, they have an elevation of 162.
Yeah, so that'll allow for the utilities, like
where
one of
the
which
pipes are
would be
gonna go
the storm drainage, would be the water, electric, and underground utilities to basically go over the top of the culvert.
So what's the grade in top of the catch basin pipe to grade?
The grade of the road up, just by way of example, the catch basin in this area here is approximately elevation 162 for the finished grade.
I think the other issue, and what you were talking about is, you've got the 4 lots up here, and basically it looks like it's on top of a little hill. And no matter what you do, you've got to get that water out of there. It's got to go someplace, otherwise you're going to start pushing it towards too many different spots in the wetlands. I mean, if you looked at, let's say, just lot 6, I mean, if that's higher, if you don't have this structure here, like you said, if you have a bridge, you're going to lose that ability to pull that water back across down into your detention pond.
Right.
And otherwise, I mean, what are you going to do with the water? You're going to start shooting it out into...
Well, yeah, and again, that's part of what we looked at in the design process, and with the area that's up in here, and the nature that there really isn't one common discharge point from this 4.7 acres of land. There was no easy place to collect it all in one place to try to get, say, a secondary detention basin up in here at some point. But this area being at a higher elevation than what we're looking at here seemed to make sense to try to get this roadway system and the immediate area around it to collect as much of it as we could and then convey it down to the detention basin.
Anything more, Robert?
I think that's it, unless there are other questions from the commission.
Commissioners, any thoughts or questions? Robert, I have several, actually, that I'd like to use your expertise in referring to the drainage report. Reading it, it was perplexing to me because there were a lot of abbreviations that I don't understand. For example, what's the difference between a TR55 and a TR20 calculations?
Between the two programs, they're basically based on the same methodology, which is referred to as the Old Soil Conservation Service. In terms of the computer programs, which there's a computer program called TR55 and a computer program called TR20. TR20 is basically the grunt and the workhorse. I mean, that's a very detailed computer application. The TR55 is kind of a takeoff of that, where it's a more simplistic model, and there are a few more assumptions that are put into it that makes it easier to set up on a smaller watershed basis. But both programs and both methodologies are based on one and the same.
All right. If you have your study there, I think it's behind the first yellow one, or at least the second yellow one sheet in there, that is the hydroflow TR20 calculations. And then there's a map that you can pull out, and it refers to different areas, CS002, CS001, and then at post-development, it talks about a STR01.
Right.
I understand what they are by looking at them, but putting it all together, I had a hard time understanding what did you do there.
Well, again, this is why we like to give you guys just summary pages. But I'm glad that you looked at it and that you do have questions on some of the verbiage that's within there. Typically, we put these work maps together to basically help myself, because when I'm doing the calculations, I don't need these maps. But after we put it down and you go back 3 months later, you sit here kind of scratching your head, well, what's what? But these maps really help out. So if you take a look at work map 1, which is your page 19 in that study, for the existing conditions, you'll see that there are two cross-sections, CS001 and cross-section CS002. For the purpose of the analysis, these become the two watershed areas that were analyzed under the existing flow conditions. Proximity for CS001 is the roadway crossing here. And then if you look at the data that goes with it, there's a drainage area that's associated with that outline. there's a runoff curve number, which is associated with that drainage area, and a time and concentration. And those are the three principal components that get plugged into the computer program to do the modeling, which then gives you the peak discharge rates and runoff that values associated with it. If you take a look over on the next page, which is sheet 20, that's basically the same thing, except these are the proposed conditions. So we still have the cross-section 001. And if you take a look at the fine print, what you would notice between the pre and post, the drainage areas are slightly different. Because again, some of the houses and things like that are taken out from the pre and post, so there's a little bit of a difference there. And what you'll notice, what's probably most prominent on there is that STR01, which is in essence the detention basin on Lot 3. So that's put in there for modeling purposes, and to basically come up with peak discharge rates that would be going out of that, as well as coming up with the stage storage discharge relationship for the storm event.
What is on 2 pages after that? The watershed model schematic. Yeah, as you see, it's this, if you can see it.
A bunch of computer gobbledygook.
What is that?
This is basically the computer program, the way that they give you the schematic model, which if you were to take a look at the 2 watershed maps that you looked at before, it's pretty much the same thing. It's just shown in more of a block diagram. So where you would see all the way over to the left, you have where it says 1 and 2 up on top. Those are basically the same thing. And if you look at the designations, like 1 is CS001.
Right.
Block number 2 is CS002. And then you could just see how each of those hydrographs are pulled together and where they basically flow in terms of the computer program.
So the arrows are flow of water? That's what I didn't understand what the arrows we were pointing at.
Well, what it does, because in other words, if you take a look at that block diagram 1, okay, that represents that cross-section 1, which is that larger watershed area. And what it does, it calculates...
Let me, if I can just interrupt, I don't know if you can show for the viewers at home what I'm talking about. I have no idea what that means. You got that? All right. I'm sorry, I was just totally confused.
Right, so what that's basically showing is that you have for block diagram 1, that is a drainage area, it computes a hydrograph at that drainage area, and that's it. So after it computes the hydrograph at that point, it needs to know what to do with that flow beyond that. And that's where that secondary arrow comes up that leads out of the bottom of that. It shows how that hydrograph is combined with the other ones and routed through.
I just don't like the depiction. I mean, it's just arrows and pointing to boxes that look like clouds and red dots. Sorry. I'd like the map better. All right, let's go to a hydrographic report. Let's skip all the way to the 100-year storm, the big one. And if you'll just run us through one of those, please.
We have a page number. You want to start on.
Yeah, it was like, if I remember correctly, it's in the 60s, 56 to 60, something like that. Let's look there.
No, I think we're probably more up in the...
Is it higher? No, it's in the 60s. No, I'm talking about in the
we're
60s.
up on page 79,
No,
78.
well, let's, before you go there, then, let me start, there's one before that. Oh, wait a minute, I'm looking at the top of the page, rather than the bottom.
Yeah, look at the,
Yeah,
the
look
bottom,
at the
the bottom is
bottom.
what's really indexed better.
Yeah, that's then page 83. At the top, it says 61, the bottom says 83.
Right, okay, actually, we're going to start back up a few pages
Good.
before that on 78.
Works for me.
And on page 78, what you have there is basically the hydrograph summary report for the 100-year return period. And what you'll see listed in the table there is that basically you have 13 hydrographs that were computed as part of the computer program. These hydrographs contain both the pre and post development, so you do have to take a look at the hydrograph descriptions to really have an idea of how everything is pulled together. So if you were to take a look at the summary report, what you would see, and again, all this remains consistent. If you look at the hydrograph description, hydrograph number 1 represents cross-section 001. Okay, and if you take a look in there for the 100-year flow, for the 100-year storm, if you look at the third column, the computer program has calculated a peak flow of 22.6 CFS. Okay, and then if you bounce down to the second one, which is CS002, for that particular hydrograph, it's calculated a 100-year peak flow rate of 34 CFS. Now, if you want to take a look at what the combined flows for those two hydrographs are, which is where it basically gets the two of them combined,
Then 22.
you're gonna bounce down to hydrograph number 7.
All right, stop right there. Let's just pick the very first one. If I'm looking at the graph on page 79, then that corresponds to the first one. Going across the bottom, you have 26 hours. What is happening in the first 10 hours? Nothing?
Pretty much. That is I'm sure if this commission has asked for these reports from other applicants in the past, these graphs are pretty standard and typical.
Yeah, I just want to understand it.
It's characteristic of a Type 3 SCS storm, where if you look at that spike that typically occurs between the 11th and 13th or 14th hour, what the models and what the formulas tell you within those calculations is that you're getting the majority of your rainfall event occurs over a very short period of time, over that hour and a half or 2 hours. So even though, what's referred to as a 24-hour storm, for the purpose of the modeling and for generating peak rates of discharge, it's assumed, and it's characteristic of the shape of this curve, that the majority of that rainfall occurs over a very short period of time.
And the flows here are tremendous during the 12th to the 14th hour.
Right. Well, and that's where the peak gets calculated. So again, if you were to take a look at the summary table on the page before, you'll see that the peak is 22.58 CFS, and that does correspond to the peak on the graph on the page right next to it. And if you were to take a look at the graph, it should give you the time when that actually occurs, and it's telling you that at that peak discharge rate, it occurs at the 12.37th hour.
Okay.
So, I mean, what you see is that in these spikes, that peak rate of discharge only occurs for a very small period of time on either side of the curve. Those peak rates tend to drop off very quickly.
All right, if you'll just bear with me then, finally, you've led us all the way through, and I did that on purpose so that we could get up to where we are, and hopefully everyone's following. Now, if you go to pages 64 and 65, post-development, implementing your storm management plan, this is what changes significantly to me, is that the peaks are still there on page 64. They are spread out over many more hours on page 65, and then your control structure is also graphed on page 66. If you could just show us those, I think it'll help me, certainly, if not anyone else.
Okay. All right, so with the one that you're looking at on page 86 is hydrograph number 8. And basically, this is a post-development hydrograph, which combines hydrographs numbers 3, 5, and 6. And just for your point of clarification, that is combining CS001 post-development. It's combining Structure 1 post-development, and then it's also providing for the routing through Structure 1, which is doing a reservoir routing. So that's why you have basically you've got the multitude of curves on that area. So if you take a look at the red line that's on there, which represents the peak up around 48.1, that is the culmination of the two hydrographs coming in. So that would basically be the summation of cross sections 1 and the detention basin.
And what does page 87 show then?
Now, page 87 shows that under one of the analysis conditions that we looked at was if we considered exfiltration going out through the bottom of the basin, which we ran this as an analysis. It's not what we based our summary numbers on or tables. But this is what the exfiltration rate through that detention basin would look like if applied to the hydrographs for that particular basin.
Is that what you use to determine whether it's going to be breached?
No. No, this,
No.
this has nothing to do with the breaching. What this has more to do with is taking a look at in terms of volume from that particular area. So if the bottom of that basin has a gravelly, sandy area, in addition to storing the water, it also has an opportunity to percolate out or infiltrate into the ground around it. Now, normally when we do the design analysis on this, and that's the case in the summary numbers that we've given you in the report, we go on the assumption that this basin has like an impervious liner, whether it's plastic, concrete, or whatever. No water goes out through the bottom of the basin. The only way water gets out of the basin is through the control structure itself. Okay, and that's quite honestly the most conservative way to design it, is to assume that you have no water that would be infiltrating into the surrounding ground area.
So then the flip of that is if it weren't impervious, this is what would happen.
Correct. Right.
Gotcha, now that makes sense.
Right.
Good. And what's the difference then I think this is my last question, and let someone else jump in, on page 88, from the control structure, what's that then versus the basin?
Well, this would be, okay, this would include the routing or the peak discharges leaving the control structure in this location. So this includes the water that's leaving the control structure, going out through the control structure, as well as what would be infiltrating into
So
the ground.
that's
So it's a combination of
combined.
those two. That's combined, right.
They are similar, and it looks like you did it over 60 hours. That's enough for now. I just had a inkling to ask. There was a footnote I wanted to ask about, but I don't remember where it is. I'll find it. Let someone else, if anyone else wants to jump in, please.
Let me see. I'll-
Diana, please.
On page 4, you've got the pre and post peak flows. So following up with the 100-year storm, that looks like the existing is 49 and the proposed is 34.
Right.
Do you have hydrographs that reflect those so that we can compare the hydrographs?
Certainly do. All I gotta do is find them out.
Oh, here it is right here. I don't know what this means. What the heck does that mean?
Okay, for the existing conditions in the 49 CFS, you're going to be looking at it's basically going to be any of the hydrograph 13s for the 2 through 100-year event. So if you're looking for the 100-year, just bounce back to that. That's going to be on page 90 is one. That would be the combined with the post-development. And then on page 89, that would be the combined with pre-development.
They look identical, which is that's kind of good.
But that's the whole point, it has to be.
So if you were to take a look on page 89, again, what the chart on page 4 represents is the red line shown on page 89. And you'll see that very closely corresponds with the 89 CFS, or not, I'm sorry, 48 CFS.
Now, you're controlling peak flows here, but are you controlling volume? They look very close.
Well, the volume, and again, this is the reason why we did run the calculations as part of this report. In terms of designing the peak flow rates, we didn't consider any of the infiltration or exfiltration from the detention basin into the calculations. Again, in terms of runoff volume, we've got the rooftop galleries, which again have not been factored into the calculations, so that tends to be very conservative in terms of the design. And then if you take a look at, and I believe, I'd have to find the numbers, but we took a value based upon the percolation test that we had out there for the septic systems and applied a safety factor to that in arriving at what an anticipated infiltration or exfiltration rate would be out of the basin. And that's where some of the other charts that we were looking at came in. So if you're going to go back to the summary tables, there would be runoff volume that is actually calculated in those tables that goes back into the ground. I don't believe in the report I had actually summarized that, though, to see, if we met a zero increase in runoff volume. But it's like you said, if you take a look at the hydrographs, they're reasonably close.
I did find the footnote, it was on page 4,
Oh.
under the combined flow, and it just says, footnote number 1, right at the very top.
Yep.
If you know, flows indicated are, well, if you could explain what that, read it and explain what that is, if you
Yeah,
can find it.
that's very easy.
Yeah.
And this is quite
The thing that
quite
threw me,
common.
it says it's to the perimeter of the property.
Right. What the footnote says is flows indicated are for point discharges. For this particular watershed, the flows are dispersed along the perimeter of the property or watershed boundary. Okay. Probably the best way of looking at this, if we look at that area for CS 001, which is basically the area that's tributary to the roadway crossing, okay? That would be considered a point discharge because that entire watershed area culminates right here. So everything comes down to this given location. So if the calculations say that we have 20 CFS for that given watershed, that 20 CFS occurs right at that point. Now, when we take a look at cross-section 002, which basically kind of comes around the perimeter, what that is saying, if we have that same 20 CFS for the sake of argument, it's not at any one given point. It's kind of dispersed along the perimeter because there is no single point discharge leaving that area of the site, if you would.
Oh, I see, because that's only talking about the cross-section 002 at that point.
Right.
Ah,
Right.
Gotcha.
Because if you're going to look at trying to get all this down to a common point, we'd have to analyze, a much larger watershed that would include a lot of the offsite area, which really has no bearing on the sizing of this basin.
I'm with you. Anyone else? Scott? Diana?
I have some questions about, I guess, consideration of alternatives for specific lots. On SP3, on the soil erosion plan, the silt fence is pretty much the limit of disturbance, I'm assuming, and in some areas, that goes up to well, like on Lot 5, it's 8 feet. On Lot
Sure,
4,
what is
it's
on
15
eight?
feet.
Diane, help me there. What's on that lot 5, 8 feet?
The limit of disturbance to the wetland. If you look
Oh,
at the
okay.
erosion control plan, you can see that.
Yeah, okay.
Now, that vegetation there that's going to be cleared for that, is that full-size trees over there?
Well, let's back up for 1 second. I think Mr. Codispoti hit on this during his presentation. For the most part, if you take a look at the existing conditions of the site, and probably your colored-up drawing would be the best one there.
This one might be.
The vast majority of this development
Together.
or of the site area is not taking place within the wooded area. Almost all the roadway construction and the houses, for the most part, are within the farmed or cropland areas depicted by that corner. And I think with what we had, if you take a look, even on Lot 5, the house itself is within the cleared area. The silt fence line that we have coming down here, and I believe that this is what you're making reference to, that this is relatively close to the wetlands. Again, in part, does that necessarily mean that that's going to be the cleared area? No, it doesn't. What we did, because we do have the roof drains and footing drains coming out to this area, and those are largely going to, the location of those are largely going to be predicated on the basement floor elevations. We've got to be able to daylight those and get those out. So this was a general area here on lot number 5 of where that foundation drain would have to discharge in order to be able to get out via gravity. So with that in mind, the silt fence is kind of wrapped up towards the end there to allow for the installation. Now, can we take the silt fence line up here and kind of turn that in a 90-degree area and get that up closer to the toe slope? Yeah, we certainly can.
Well, actually, my question, though, is the vegetation there, what is that? I think it's mature trees. Is that correct?
Yeah, because pretty much once you get off the crop area
Yeah.
or the farm area, it's a pretty dense,
Okay.
it's a pretty dense.
So, they could have a canopy of 40 to 60 feet. You take out one tree and you've lost your entire canopy, and pretty much you're letting the sun in. It's going to, really change the temperature of the water there, the temperature flowing to the wetland. And what we're going to get in there is lawn, because that's what the property owner is going to want to put in there. So I'm concerned about the closeness of removing mature trees to the wetlands in these areas, in the areas where they already have a decent buffer that's protecting them from impacts from, any chemicals that had been put on the fields. Well, the similar type of chemicals will be put on the lawns, fertilizers, pesticides. But we're bringing it that much closer now by removing these trees. I'm not as concerned where there's already a field because, yes, there's no trees there. But in these areas, we're making it worse and causing more impacts to the wetlands.
Yeah, as far as what would be lost in that area, we haven't done a tree count or to know the actual locations of which trees would go. The one comment that I would make is just given the orientation of this area here, I don't foresee that there would be any direct impact to the wetlands here because any of the canopy that's lost in this area here would basically be on the northerly side of the wetlands. So in terms of the loss from additional sunlight being introduced into the wetlands, I would be more concerned if you're losing tree canopy on the south side of the wetlands as opposed to the north or west side of it.
Well, it is the west side too, but then it's not just that, it's also the activities there to put the gallery in and the grading. We're removing the microtopography under the trees that slow the water down, clean it, cool it before it gets into there, and then it's just going to really be lawn. I'm just concerned about the closeness of some of these to the wetlands.
Similarly, Robert, did you ever do any calculations or come up with a quantitative measurement of how much water a tree may drink such that if you remove trees upstream, the downstream people see the result that their water rises faster?
I've never done any.
Yeah.
I don't know if Mr. Abrams is here. He may.
Yeah, well,
I don't know if he could venture.
I
a guess
can't
on it.
quantify it either, but I'd be very concerned about the number of trees being lost as well.
Robert, I have a question. I think the last time that you were here, we had sort of talked about, or I had asked the question about, technically this is hypothetical. I mean, each lot is, from the house that you put on is a hypothetical situation, meaning that you'll sell one lot, someone's going to have to come back in with a plan and talk about it possibly from that point forward. Are these houses, driveways maximized to, I guess, to whatever the degree is that they can be built as big as they can be built? And were those the calculations that were used for figuring off the runoff going down into the detention pond?
Yeah, in terms of the detention pond, in fact, we even went beyond that because in terms of the sizing of the detention basin, we also factored in that 10th lot, which is not part of this
It's not
application
part
at
of
this
that,
point.
right.
But the basin has been sized, the stormwater conveyance system has all been sized in anticipation of that 10th lot.
But these were proposed, I think, some of them at least were 5-bedroom homes.
I believe the vast majority of them are 5-bedroom homes. And again, they were set up based upon what the soils are capable of handling for the given site area. Now, does that preclude somebody that buys the house from putting up a 4-bedroom or 3-bedroom? Obviously not.
Right.
But I think, we wanted to be realistic in what we showed. And, in being able to market it, you want to be able to show what is realistic to be built on the site and not just try to cookie cutter and just put a box shape on there and move on with it.
Just as a refresher, where would the 10th lot be? Could you point to that again?
The 10th lot would be,
Lot 9.
basically, it would be a re-subdivision of Lot 9.
Oh, okay.
Lot 9 is, I'm trying to find it, it's a couple acres, 3 acres or something, if I believe.
For you to sketch on the back of one of these drawings, the starting contour of where the bottom of the culvert would be, and then for you to sketch on the back of one of these drawings, the starting contour of where the bottom of the culvert would be, and then what the final contour would be relative to what's The drain coming through, looks like it's 152 feet.
That sheet has to be 8.
I must have an old drawing, because I don't have. Must be 8.
Oh, because it's tilted down. It's tilted. I was wondering why they were two different on each end, of course. Going down. Don't ask that out. Shut the microphone off.
Okay, thanks.
We get the right end up.
Bob, while we're, I don't know where Commissioner Ewan wants to go with that at the moment, but while he's pondering that, I do also, after my site walk, have some really great concerns with Lot 5 and the location of that house and its proximity to the wetland. And I was curious if there was any other way to reposition the house on the lot to pull it away. I see it is quite close to the 50-foot front setback. But can it be relocated, downsized, septic put in another area, something, because it's just not going to work, in my opinion, for the people that are going to live there. It's just not what they're going to be expecting, and I'm sure this is not going to be anything less than probably $1 million edifice here by the time we're done, and they're just not going to have any yard, period. And I foresee that this is going to be it's going to be turned into lawn area before anybody even knows it. I'm really distressed by that.
I had a concern with that also, because when I looked at the driveway, the contour line that follows pretty much where, just to the corner of the house there, it's like at 162, and then it drops to 160 when you're going back towards the wetland area. By the looks of it, you're almost going to get down to maybe 154 by the slope of the driveway there. And I'm sure there's ways to build it up and to pull the water back out, but, and again, that looks like a quick exit down to the wetland area down there.
Well, actually, up in that corner, there's a small retaining wall at the end of the driveway. Because what you'll see is that you have, just on the uphill side of the garage, you're at elevation 162 with that contour. And the driveway grades are going to kind of carry down to right with where the 160 is. And that's basically the flow path for the runoff that comes from that area there. But right at the hammerhead on that driveway, if you take a look at the grades that drop down, you'll see how the contour lines kind of blend into that solid line there. That solid line would represent like a small retaining wall in that area to basically help with the grading transition in that immediate area.
You mean as far as bringing that back end up, back towards, so, right, that's what I thought.
Well, yeah,
Okay.
it's not going to bring it back up and pitch it to the road. But instead of having a very steep driveway leading down to the wetlands, you want to have that relatively flat so
Right.
that you don't have, any problems with the vehicles and icing and things like that. So that's why this is relatively flat in here, and then this slopes off in a more gentle way, but right at the hammerhead, because that tends to compress that area. You'll have a small retaining wall right in that area. It's about.
Well, it gets into, if you just looked at, plowing in the winter, salt or whatever, that could get put into that area. If it gets pushed and you do have a small retaining wall, it gets pushed over the retaining wall down towards the wetlands. It's not that far from that. Yes, you do have a buffer zone with the trees and stuff.
I don't know that there is.
Right there.
Yeah.
It's, that's one of the things I just noticed, that's all.
Yeah, I think to address Scott's comments, I think we did have an alternate for lot number 5 that we looked at, where we basically had the house mirrored and flipped around, but it really didn't gain all that much, because what it tended to do is push more fill on the over towards the septic side. And I think in terms of just having a usable backyard area, it got it that much closer to the wetlands as opposed to what was laid out there. Let me check in my folder and see if I have that sketch, to see if it's something that you may have been looking for.
And was that the only place that deep test holes were done? I'll wait for you to get back. I don't have much choice.
We're going to take a look to see if we have that alternate sketch.
Well, I mean, I'm looking at the going across the driveway area. I don't see any test holes there. Were any test holes dug in that area to see if the septic could go on the other side and this house be rotated so that it was cocked in more towards the stone wall rather than?
No, because initially when we did the lot layouts, we did take a look at that. And because of the spread lengths that were available up in that area, it wasn't an area that was really conducive to trying to lay a septic system out in that area. We just didn't have enough length to go back into that direction.
Scott, what is the distance, your best guess, from the 5 to the wetlands on lot 5? Sorry, what is your distance? Scale? It's also got more sides on it than I want to guess at.
Well, we're at a 50 scale here on this one.
Which is the 50 scale? Help me, or I don't know.
That'll be easier.
Here, try that.
But I'm going to guess, without even looking, it's something like 40 feet. It's not even 50, might even be less than that. But from the house on lot 5 to the wetlands?
From the, yeah, I don't have my scale now.
No, you don't have to say it. Here, use this one, it's bigger. So
It looks like the house is at least 50 feet away.
Yeah, I mean, the house
Yeah.
itself is, but there's a lot of, there's
But
just,
your point is, if the driveway's closer than that, his
And
point
there's no
about there's no
yard.
snow plowing, and to the extent that a new homeowner goes in there, what is the future of that area going to be?
The grading below the driveway is about 20 feet. The gallery is about 25 feet. You know, once somebody gets in there, they're going to want to put lawn as far as they can get it. You know, and there are other properties that are very close too. There's lot 4, lot 2, where the footing drain is outletting, although that can be pulled back, but I'm concerned there too about the trees that are having to be removed right up to the wetland, it appears. And then the basin is fairly close. It's about 30 feet. And, let's see, lot 4 I said was 15.
Here was one of the alternates that we had looked at on lot 5. Basically, that was just keeping the same house footprint and doing a mirror reverse image on it. It didn't appear that there's a whole lot to be gained by going to that setup, primarily because of the backyard area.
Do you plan in the areas where you're going very close to the wetland where there is not a buffer? For example, on lot, what lot is this one? It's hard to see, 6. Is it 8? Maybe installing a buffer, you know, trees or something like that to identify the limits of where their lawn would be established.
Yeah, in other words, you're talking about the western boundary of lot 8 up here?
Down near the house and up there, yes, all along.
Up by the septic, yeah, because primarily the edge of the wetlands is almost on that cleared wooded area that exists on the site now. We don't presently have anything shown on the drawings to provide for any demarcation in that area.
Well, I think it also talks about human nature, you know, I mean, and Scott can probably attest to this, of people just thinking of the wetlands as a place to dump mulch and whatever else that they can put in that, just because, you know, it's out of sight, out of mind.
If we had some decent distances between the activities and the wetlands, we'd have a little more of a buffer to protect from that, but because they're so close, it's, you know, you can't possibly protect them at those distances.
Is there any reason why Lot 8 can't be slid, the house can't be slid eastward or northeastward towards the cul-de-sac to pull it farther away?
Shorten the driveway in essence.
Well, yeah, I mean, the front corner of the house on Lot 8 right now is at the front setback line.
For which one is the driveway being the front, or is
No, the house
the-
corner.
the radius being the front of the property?
This corner right here is virtually sitting on the setback line.
Yeah, right there. This corner,
Is sitting on what?
setback from the road, yeah.
Oh, as far as how far it has to be from.
Mhm.
Yeah, but, okay, so why can't it go northeasterly back? I mean, which one are you using?
Oh, because you've got this, it's a compound curve that comes around the cul-de-sac radius and it comes around the radius of the road, so by the time you get back up into here, your setback line is right up and through here. So, okay.
In any case, it appears to me that every house, every lot is within the 100-foot upland review area, to the extent we can maximize the distance from any wetland, and based on these tight configurations, is going to be needed on every lot. Usually, we're looking at particular ones, we're jumping from lot 3 to 6 to 8. In fact, you just have to look at every one and try to make it as far as possible, with a consideration that there may well be a desire to seed and mow lawns in the future.
Well, even the infiltrator's on 5, for crying out loud. I mean, is there any reason why they can't go to the front of the parcel? I believe you gotta be 25 feet from the septic with the infiltrator.
Well, you gotta be 25 feet, and typically, we like to get the infiltration galleries down gradient of the house. If you start putting them up gradient of the house, number one, it's gonna become more difficult to get the rear drains into them. And then number two, the more you do get into it, you don't want that to have a tendency of migrating into the basement either. So if you start to locate the infiltration galleries, they really need to be, on the uphill side, they need to be spaced much further away from the dwelling unit.
Well, even in that case, it could be moved down there. It looks like past DT 92 or whatever that is around. Although maybe that's not far enough from the septic, the reserve.
Yeah, I mean, there might be a little bit more room, like basically to tweak that and get that around the corner here. At the end of the day, that's still going to start to cut back into your wooded area, you know, back in that section.
Wherever you show your 40-foot reserve area, there's a stone wall there with almost nothing in front of it for vegetation, and if that roof drain infiltrator could be rotated around into that direction, you're still going to be working under the same contour, 158, I believe it is. I mean, that would really help to eliminate a lot of disturbance on the back side of the house, and then the other option is to put a line in the sand in the form of a retaining wall across there, and that would be the end of the disturbance, and fill up against the retaining wall rather than have it slope off.
Not quite following you on that one.
Well, you've got existing contour, I think it's like 156, Trader is pushing in towards the 154 contour as it comes into the wetland, so Trader is pushing in towards the 154 contour as it comes into the wetland, so at that 158 contour, I mean, it would almost seem like with all the fill that's going to go on over here and the grading that is going to be required, because you've got a fill line right on that 156, I mean, realistically, you could put a big, nice level area with a retaining wall and fill against it right about where your infiltrator is shown, heading towards the DT92 test pit there. And that would keep everything and everybody from wanting to encroach into that whole area.
Along the contour of the silt fence then? Or not the contour, but along the silt fence line?
Well, even that's too close, in my opinion.
Yeah, okay.
And again, I mean, when you say the fill, it's not that you have a tremendous amount of fill. If you take a look at that 150 contour that comes up through, or I'm sorry, the 160 contour, if you look off that back end of the house, that's only a 2-foot fill there. Because you're showing the 160 contour going over a 158, so it's not that you have a tremendous amount of fill there by any means.
But you got to grade it out, and that's wherein lies the issues. I mean, sure, 2 foot this way is fine if you've got it held off with a retaining wall, but 2 foot this way, by the time you grade it out, you're down to 6 feet.
Hmm.
And I think that's the point that we're all trying to make here. This limit of disturbance is just going to head right in there. And it is, a
May I make a comment?
great
Mr.
area there.
Cotespoti, please.
Yes. We have no problem with that. I think what this commission's concerned about is very legitimate in the sense that can there be some demarcation line between where the limit will end? Because this may not be the house that's built there. I don't mean that to be facetious, but we have no problem with that. The revision we can make, as Scott says, either it could be a stone wall, right, instead of a stone retained, something attractive is what I mean.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we can do something very attractive and indicate that this is the limit of lawn, or whatever it might be, that this wall has to be built. We don't have a problem with that, because we recognize that in order to be as reasonable as we can, there may have to be some limits that are placed for individuals who come in there, that they're aware of what those limits are when they go in. So having some type of retaining wall back there is not a problem. I don't foresee that being any difficulty at all. Scott?
Everything's just going to head right down to that intermittent water course. Everything's just going to head right down to that intermittent water course. Maybe I'm a little bit, it's a little bit, see, what you're looking at, what I'm looking at, this is also where your proposed stockpile area is on my SP3, so it has a tendency to alter
Was this
looking at.
passed out, I'm sorry, was this passed out that really indicates where the 50 and 100 foot, the 50 foot is because of the septic system and the 100 foot?
I don't believe so.
That's
I
passed out, so
marked my own, but I don't think that was
It'll be
passed
a lot
out.
easier for you, 'cause it's already shown where the 50 foot line is and where the 100 foot
Sorry,
line
Dennis.
is. And, so maybe you could pass those around. The red line there is 50 feet, and is that one blue? My eyes are fading. Blue line is a 100-foot review area. And the reason we put the 50 instead of a 40, which you used to have as your review area, is because that is where the limits of septic system would be. So as far as...
Do you have another one for Diana by chance?
I'll just send this one down.
Sure,
Okay.
send that one down.
We're going to need one for the file, though.
I'll give you mine.
At a quick glance, you can see what's happening within the 50 feet. And the one good thing that we haven't really emphasized is that much of this there'll be very little removal of trees in the area. But for those areas that are close to the wetlands, we're happy to take suggestions as to whether a stone wall or some other simple demarcation that will indicate the limits of any kind of activity. That doesn't present a problem to them.
Just to be clear, let me say, the blue line represents the
100 feet.
100 feet from the wetlands, the red line represents 50 feet.
Correct.
I thought I heard somebody say
Not
40.
40, the reason I said we didn't use 40, that was your previous.
Right.
But
Okay.
because the 50 is with, where you're permitted to use a septic system or have a septic system. It can't be within, it has to be at least 50 feet from the wetland.
I think one of my other questions is, if any of the commissioners that know the property or walk the site, there is a crossing, farm crossing now that I kind of wondered why they didn't use that area to put this culvert in, and the topography is such that it probably doesn't lend itself, and I think it would have more of an impact. But I'm wondering if those farm crossings should stay, or whether they should be removed if this box culvert gets installed. And I just have a question, especially the northerly one. I mean, it's basically just a rubble crossing that the water travels underneath it now. Is it advantageous to leave it as a velocity dissipator, or would it be advantageous to remove it and let the water continue to flow back down through as it once had in the past?
Where is that crossing?
That's probably maybe 80 to 100 feet above the box culvert,
Okay.
northern end,
Mm-hmm.
and it's in the middle of the intermittent water course.
On Lot 9.
It would be on Lot 9. Actually, it's fairly close to...
To the line between 8 and 9, maybe?
Right. I'm assuming, Jay, you can probably confirm that a little better.
So you're concerned that it should,
Well, I'm just trying to-
questioning whether it should remain or not?
Should remain or not with,
Well, that's a disturbance within the wetlands if we do mess with it.
right, but it's also,
I don't think they were going to come here and propose that.
I'm just thinking for flow purposes.
Yeah, I don't know.
And it will be, I'm assuming it will be utilized, and I believe Mr. Weiwei already touched upon this, it will be utilized to bring equipment in up to this northeast
Oh.
corner prior to
Yeah.
the box culvert and the road being done also. So we're going to have the potential of two multiple wetlands
Mhm.
crossings.
But that's, Scott, that's not necessary. The first crossing, as we fill it, we can bring equipment in across. We don't have to use multiple crossings. If they chose to do it and it was there, that's one thing. It isn't there's no necessity to construct this road to have multiple crossings. It just is not needed. We can start the filling of that wetland or doing what we have to do in the logical order.
Well, I think the reason I'm asking to, and it really has nothing to do with construction so much, but when you out there and you look at the location of this crossing as it exists, the potential for the homeowner or their yard caregiver to go to that crossing, and here's this great wonderful ditch on either side of the crossing that an awful lot of debris could be dumped into without any problem whatsoever. So it almost seems to me like that crossing should be removed and restore that stream channel to what it was probably at least 100 years ago, to kind of act as a preventive maintenance for the wetland to be used as a dumping area, that intermittent water course.
I think there may be alternatives
Yeah.
to achieve that, but,
We
yeah.
love to leave things alone. You tell us to fix it, we can, but,
Diana?
you know, that
Yeah,
becomes-
that's my concern too. If there's something that looks like a crossing, something they can get some equipment on, they will do it.
Absolutely.
There's two crossings there. They're about 100 feet apart.
Right.
The one that would be, the one that's proposed here, in my estimation, is the one that is the north one. Then there's another one south of that that went through a barway. There was a barway and then it went down.
The
That-
one to the south of the proposed crossing can stay.
Yeah.
Because that's the side of the road, there's no lots involved with that per se.
So there's an opening in the stone wall and that people could, you know, if they are in that lot and they wanted to go from, well,
Well, to the extent that Scott's has a desire to look at the crossing on lots 8 or 9.
In between
It's-
8 and 9.
Yeah, between 8 and 9. There are two issues then. And one is, as it is today, during construction, so that would be one part, and then the other one would be post-construction, after somebody moves in there, if it remained. Is, we can keep these guys from touching it ever. Can we keep the homeowner from touching it ever? One way to do that is deed restrict it,
You may do that, or else, as we said, if...
or deal with it as you suggested.
Yeah, and
Well,
if
I mean,
you...
right now, you could take it out with no impacts at all,
Yeah,
because it's completely dry.
yeah.
We need your permission to do that.
Yeah.
You need to tell us to
Yeah.
do that. We'll do it. It's not a problem for us to correct that or remove
I'd
that.
suggest that be, if you'd make note of it, if there is a motion on this application, that be made part of the motion. And we direct them what to do.
We have no problem with that.
Thank you.
Would you rather see it done quickly? But it would have to be presumably,
No,
Yeah.
I wrestle with myself back
Yeah.
and forth on this, because like Commissioner Ewan is right, there are two. There's one to the south, but, which I believe essentially is on lot number 4. But it is so much embedded in part of the landscape of the wetland there that there's really not much in the way of impact. The other one, I think, is going to have long-lasting impacts if it's allowed to remain in its current configuration, more so by the ultimate homeowners rather than under the construction activities.
ladies and gentlemen, we have 9:55. Typically, we stop at 10. If anyone wants to deal with this again tonight for the next 5 minutes, think of it now, or then we'll be back in 2 weeks. Mr. Codispoti.
Yes, the only question we have is, what can we do to expedite matters 2 weeks from now? Would you like to see limits set on the lots of some kind? Is that what you're asking for?
I hear
mean,
that
is
there's going to be some sort of a means to deal with the homeowners, let alone, as Scott's alluded to at least one part about that crossing during construction. Yes.
Would it be better to show that in the form of simple overlays, so that when we do the final revisions, we don't have to do those 3 times? Can we do that way, or what suggestion do you have? Because we'd like to...
Diana or Scott, you want to, they'd work for me, but I don't know about you two,
I
the
think
professionals.
Yeah, I think you really need to look at reworking these and try to get a decent buffer in between the disturbance and the wetland, and then show how you're going to protect that.
So you'd like a revised drawing, is that what you're talking about now? Or shall we wait, shall we give you, we would give you those revisions one lot at a time.
I would
in
not be
red.
willing to approve that unless I could see what was actually there. And what I would like to see is a decent enough buffer that's got mature trees left in it.
I think, I mean, they can do it, I would think an overlay for the time being, because each one of these lots is subject to change anyway, but at least so that we have a comfort level. But to redo the entire site plan,
You're talking about individual lots that are a concern, an overlay.
yes. Right.
Okay, but I think it's going to have to look at significant manipulation
Well,
on some of them.
I agree, it's going to take significant, but in other words, I mean, this could be depicted where we would want things for limits of disturbance, rather than going into killing 100 more trees, is what I'm trying to say here.
It's not always bad to kill trees.
11 by 17 showing,
Depends where they are.
you know, what they could do to massage these lots to give us a better comfort level, if that's amenable to the commission. I just bring that up, that's all.
It would be the simplest way, and then when we do the final revision, everything...
As long as it has enough detail. I mean, I don't want to see it on 8.5 by 11-inch paper and
Well, what I mean-
so small that we couldn't see, and that that scale just may not be good.
We could meet with...
I think the overlay works. I kind of think you do, but Diana, certainly if you want to see it, this is the time. This is an important matter.
No, I think the overlay is fine as long as it's detailed. That's my concern.
okay,
I want
the
to see the
detail.
details. This is a-
Commissioners, I'm
This
sorry,
is
go
a
ahead.
public hearing, so I didn't know. If there's only a couple people out there, I don't know if they're
Yeah.
here for this.
Yeah. That's true. I hardly asked anyone, I didn't ask anyone tonight, but the public still can speak. We will keep the public hearing open for next time, and then presumably close it at the next meeting and deliberate after that. This is the time to consider what things you might want from the applicant.
I would like to comment that at some point during, I believe, Mr. Codaspodi's presentation, that Mr. Abrams, I believe was the name he used, was present to answer any questions. I don't know who Mr. Abrams is or what he does, and if he has made the trip to be here, we should at least probably find out whether we need him to come back again or whether he should come up and speak his piece for a moment.
Absolutely. I failed to recognize it. Thank you. Mr. Abrams, I take it you're coming up to the podium. Please state your full name and why you're here.
Dr. Ron Abrams. I'm a consulting ecologist with Drew Associates, Inc. since 1986. I teach environmental science at Long Island University, and I'm a certified environmental professional with the Academy of Board Certified Environmental Professionals.
Excuse me, where's Drew Associates located?
Long Island.
At the city?
Glen Cove.
Thank you.
In fact, Scott has met my staff in the field.
Okay. But it's Glen Cove, New York. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, for several years we've been performing various studies on the wetlands and wildlife and habitat at the site in response to questions asked by Codaspodi and Mr. Riccitelli, and we have what we think is a wealth of knowledge and understanding of the property. We have passed comment to Bob Wee throughout the design of this project. We do feel that for the most part, the wetlands and water quality feeding the wetlands is very well protected by the design and the management of the storm water. I've obviously listened to discussions tonight and would be pleased to work with Bob and Joseph to do more to address the concerns for setbacks and management techniques. There are other techniques available in the industry for protecting in buffer areas between structures and wetlands. And of course, I understand and kind of agree with your comments about defining the backyards and making sure that the subdivision considers what future homeowners would do. As to whether I could give you a full presentation now, I think it's more relevant if I responded to specific questions. I would be available next time if that's the way you want to handle it.
Did your firm generate a report for all of the work that was done out on the site?
We have generated internal memos, and we have a wealth of data, material used by Codaspodi in developing the plans. We never reached a point where we were asked specific questions upon which we would, offer a specific report, and we can do that if so desired.
Commissioners? Scott is looking for something. Take your time.
Thank you. Original application, Katie.
Mr. Abrams, while he's looking, the thought is, well, what are some of the alternatives rather than perhaps a retaining wall?
Well, in some of the areas of concern, well, let me start by saying this. Most of the, in fact, I think all of the home sites are sitting for the most part on former farm fields. What we've discovered over the last 10 or 15 years in watching residential properties take over farm properties is that the surface soils have been very well mixed and plowed. And we find that in terms of runoff and siltation, there's a naturally defined edge after X-teen years of farm field use. For example, the edge for lots 4 and 5 is, if you go out in the field and you look at it, it's a clear edge. There's the wetland and the woodland and then the farm field. And by staying within the farm field and then capturing those soils and managing them, it is an improvement. We see a reduction in siltation and sediment transport from farm fields into wetlands. So in that sense, this type of development will help the wetlands done properly. Other measures that I'm thinking about are more fine-scale grading and drainage measures. For example, your concern about Lot 8. There's a pretty significant buffer. It's 48 or so feet to the corner of this building. In this area, if we were concerned about drainage in this area, it would be possible to put linear drainage features that carry that water, capture water coming from the developed area and carry it in the direction that management would dictate, which is downhill and not directly into a wetland. And then that water can be infiltrated into the ground. There are infiltration structures used in this design, and they can be adjusted, enhanced, and I think that's something that Bob and I could discuss in lots that have been identified as having a concern.
Diana?
My main concern is the phosphorus going into the wetlands from the lawns, the herbicides going in there, the pesticides. So that's why I would like to see a buffer there that's not kept as manicured lawn.
What
Scott.
I was looking for is the original application for this subdivision, and there is a check mark here that they have provided us with and some of it they have, but the sentence reads, effects shown on vegetation, wildlife, erosion, sedimentation, pollution, or flooding, if any. I don't know that we've heard anything about vegetation or wildlife yet this evening, and I was kind of assuming that that's where you were headed, but if you don't have a report, I think it would be rather difficult for you to actually live up to this application requirement that the effect shown on the vegetation and wildlife it has been satisfied.
Well, I have performed the research necessary to produce such a report.
Bring it with you next time. Anybody else? That's it. Thank you, Mr. Abram. Robert or Mr. Codispoti or Gary, would anyone like to address us for the final comments for tonight? We'll be back in 2 weeks. Mr. Riccitelli.
Gary Riccitelli, 200 Boston Post Road, Orange. I'm the fee owner and developer of this project, and I just would like to make a couple of comments on some of the remarks that were made by the commission members this evening. Firstly, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for your grilling and testing of Mr. Weway's scientific and academic knowledge of hydrographs. It gives me a good satisfaction that I'm getting my money's worth. Secondly, I wanted to just articulate a little bit on some of the discussions centered around the crossing and the amount of input and time and detail that went into designing this crossing where it is presently located on the map. If I can just point out that
You can slide that over, Scott. Maybe you could reach it a little more.
His voice will carry anyway.
There you go.
this large wetland corridor that feeds down into this funnel-shaped design where this proposed wetland crossing is to occur, and then it opens back up again. As you can see, this really is the optimal point to have the crossing, and probably Mr. Ewing can attest better than anyone can how long this existing crossing has been here, but I would venture to say upwards of 100 years, and maybe more. Yeah. That the existing sand, rubble, and rock crossing, which is about 14 feet in diameter, has been used for many, many years as a crossing. So to improve it to a road standard would not be a significant impact to the wetland, as opposed to installing some type of a bridge structure, which we've done a number of those in different areas around the state, and Mr. Allen, I think, can attest to a couple of them that we did here locally on Old Tavern Road, which were much more of an impact to the wetland area than what we're proposing right now.
Made me gray.
So I would just like to state for the record that we did give a lot of thought, consideration, and time in designing the appropriate crossing for this area. And however, if the commission would like us to modify it, we certainly would be willing to and happy to look at that. And with that, I don't have any other comments for this evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We will be back November 13th, same place, same time, 7:30 p.m. Thank you very much. Good night. We don't need a motion to adjourn, but we will. And since Walter isn't here, somebody like to make a, Drew, thank you. Someone second. Jim seconds. All those in favor of adjourning. But we are not closing the public hearing. Good night. Thank you. It's 10:10 p.m.